Alrighty, so let's go through every single dungeon and try to give you a warrior specific tip that'll actually help you quite a bit. Some of these I have footage for, some of them I don't. Some of them are very useful, some of them are, kinda okay. But let's start with probably one of the most impactful ones, and one of my favorite, being Grimbatol. In Grimbatol, as long as your spell reflect is up, you can kill these tentacles like you would see a DK with AMS or Icebound Fortitude. It doesn't feel like it should work that way. Like, if we could spell reflect a single tentacle, and it would consume the spell reflect effect, and then the next tentacle would grab us, it would make sense, but it doesn't work that way. You can actually full clear all of the tentacles as long as your spell reflect is up. You'll see that the stuff is coming in, and then I will just literally clear this area for us. So I cleared this entire area just in the duration of my spell reflect, and then that allows us to just have room for the rest of the boss. And you can do this with every single set. Depending on when you time it, you can get a little bit of the spell reflect bonus for if you're targeted by these purple circles, right? So if you're targeted by these, but it's a bit more efficient if you need it to clear the room, or clear as much room as possible, and then you can like defensive stance that debuff, and then you have stuff like impending victory and all those other things. The next one here is in Stone Vault. In Stone Vault, there is this little bar that players within 20 yards, when it's activated, get 10% burst for 10 minutes. That's 10% damage and 5% DR. Very, very strong, and I feel like they designed this boss around having that amount of damage reduction. So, I try to tell my teammates to get closer, but I didn't realize this. This is activated by warriors, dwarves, or blacksmiths. Our tank ran over here before everybody else and already activated the buff, because you can see I do not have the buff here. So your teammates, your party members, have to be within pretty close proximity to this buff to actually get it. But because he ran over and popped this himself, only the tank got this buff, and the rest of our party was now negative 10% damage. So actually have your teammates within this area when you pop this. You will click on this little iron bar. It will have a dialogue option. And you just hit the dialogue option, and then it activates. Don't be like this. Don't be like this guy and not allow your team to get free 10% damage. Like, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? The next one we have going into here, let me bring up my little notepad, make sure I'm not missing anything. The next thing we have going into is something all classes can do. This is in Mists of Tyrna Scythe. On the Mistcaller boss area, if you did not go through this part of the maze, like let's say you come from the right side of the maze, any class can pull through this wall right here. And this allows you to get a lot of this trash before the boss. You can pull this trash into the boss if you're feeling spicy. But the reason this is important is if you actually are able to do enough trash before dropping down, you don't have to go get extra packs after the last boss, and your route is a little more efficient. This isn't really something warrior specific, but this is something all classes can do. Also, we can spell reflect the anima slashes from the Guardians. Going into stuff I have VODs for. The first one is in Dawnbreaker. Just pull up, yeah. So the first one here is in Dawnbreaker. You can here, I'll show this first. So in Dawnbreaker, these mini bosses, you can reflect all of these mini bosses Abyssal Blast. So as long as you're targeting the boss will turn and target you. You can reflect that. It's good, especially on this boss, this little mini boss over here, because it does the big pulsing AoE at the same time, so it's very dangerous, especially on hierarchies. If you get the blast plus the decays going off, you need some serious help in defensives. But if you're a warrior, use your spell reflect the Abyssal Blast, and you're chilling. But on the last boss, this is what I like to do. When you get these circles that come out, if you have a charge of Heroic Leap available and ready to you, you can keep full uptime by just going down here and behind the boss. Now, you can see that when you go down here, you get the insta-kill debuff. So if you do not have Leap, do not go back down here, because like if you get targeted twice in a row, like you see this strand is coming up in 23 seconds. If you go down twice in a row, you will not have leap to get back up here, and you could die from this debuff, because your charge won't take you back up these staircases to the sides to get to the boss. But if you're targeted like every other one, you can come down here, drop it, keep full uptime while you're down here, and then just leap back up to the platform. No problem. You will be LOS if you're healer, so you still probably want to pop stuff like Spell Reflect or Defensive Stance while you're doing that, just so you're a bit safer. But it allows you to save a lot of room, and it means that you can keep uptime and do damage the whole time, which is very nice, so you don't have to run out, or you don't have to leap out and then charge back in. It can get kind of wonky. So I like that. And then the next thing is for Arakara. So this is mainly for the suck mechanic, right? The way this mechanic works, you've probably seen it, you probably work with it, is at the longer that this cast goes on, the more you get sucked in. However, there is a final time where you actually get sucked into your death. When this cast for Cosmic Singularity, it's 1.0, you get sucked in one final time, and that suck is so strong that it actually lifts your character off the floor and moves you to the boss. But we can use this to our disadvantage and to our muscle memory. The reason being is that when it lifts you off the floor, all you have to do when you feel your character get lift, when you actually like, you can just leap right out of it. And you don't have to take a blue circle. You don't have to get off the boss. And like I said, the final pull happens at 1 second. So right here, 1001, it pulls you up, then you just leap out. You have a pretty good amount of leeway here to actually be able to leap out in time. It might take a little getting used to. You could die a couple times, but realistically, once you're used to watching the timer, or, like I said, feeling when that final suck happens, because for the full duration of it, it doesn't jump you. Only at the 1.0 or 1 second left of the suck does it actually leap you to the boss, because that's when it's trying to kill you more than anything else. Because if you're not inside of a puddle, it can actually leap you over puddles by pulling you up and over, which is how it's designed. But we can use that to our advantage by taking our muscle memory and being, all right, when I see my camera move and I get suck, I leap out. I am very used to this. I never take a puddle. It's very chill, and I like it quite a bit. Okay, now, what about the other dungeons? Unfortunately, let's talk about something. Let's talk about City of Threads. I do not have footage of this. In the follower dungeon, I tried to get footage, but unfortunately, this is a mythic-only mechanic, which is the Shadows of Doubt. That's when it puts the 5 orbs on you that shoot out. This mechanic is actually reflectable. It doesn't do damage back to the boss, but it stops it applying to your character. So every single time this Shadow of Doubt cast comes out, you have to pre-reflect it. So while it's casting or before it's casting, you can use like boss timers to figure out when it's going to do this. You can pre-reflect it, and if it targets you, then you simply just reflect the ability, and you only have to deal with one of those orbs coming out from one guy. It makes it infinitely easier for your group. It is way more efficient than anything else you can spell reflect. This indoctrination, that's just the big pulsing AoE, is not going to do enough damage to kill you. So please use your spell reflect on Shadows of Doubt. It can save you a ton and is so useful in keys. It's so useful for your party. This is one of the most valuable reflects outside of clearing those tentacles in Grim Batol that you can even really do. But there's other things that are interesting about City of Threads that are specific to Warrior, and it has to deal with the coagulation. So you've done this boss before. You've probably done this boss before. It does a stomp on the ground, and then it summons orbs floating in. Interestingly enough, those orbs do not do damage. They are a pure healing absorb. So, as long as you do not stand in the puddle that is left on the ground after soaking the orb, because you're not taking damage, second wind doesn't fall off. So if you're running Second Wind, you can soak basically every single orb by yourself, as long as you're not standing in pools on the ground, and completely solo this mechanic for your party. Between like you and the tank, one of the easiest things you can do as a warrior in this dungeon. You have to be very careful if you're watching boss timers. I think he does he summons orbs. He summons orbs again, and then he does Dark Pulse is the big pulsing AoE. You don't want to soak all the time on those. That's when I would honestly let your party members take one or two, let your healer run through cooldowns, that kind of thing. But when you're just doing it normally, you can basically eat all of those orbs as long as you don't stand in a ground effect and take damage, and completely heal through all of them, because it's just a big heal absorb, and we're healing 6% per second, which is a lot of healing. And we can just completely solo that mechanic for most of our group, making it way easier. And the other interesting thing about the coagulation is that that boss, compared to every other boss in the game, has 0 armor. That boss actually has no armor. Do I still have the... No, I just have the Stone Vault and the Grim Batol. But that boss is pure single target, and I ended that boss at like 1.45 million DPS with just hitting the boss normally, because it has 0 armor, so we do a ton of damage. Classes like that, like only us, Outlaw Rogues, and Feral Druids are some of the are basically pure physical classes. And we do a crazy amount of damage to that boss because it is just a pure... because it has 0 armor, so we just do a ton of damage. The only other thing that is useful in that dungeon is you can use your Spell Reflect to deal with the damage instance of the Umbral Weaves or Tremor Slams, but reflecting the Splice at the boss does quite a bit of damage, on top of making it so you're not taking a bunch of damage for the Umbral Weaves. Most of the time, what's actually going to kill you in this fight is you take a Splice, and then your healer can't catch up, and then the Slam or the Weave finish you off. But now, since we can reflect every other Splice, excuse me, a little burpee there, it actually means that we can essentially... But since we can reflect these splices, we take way less damage, and we're way safer. However, you do have to do a bit of finagling with it. I use big wigs because I use little wigs for dungeon bosses. But when you do this, you actually have to go into the City of Threads boss, all the way down to select encounter, the Grand Splicer, and you have to select this. You have to turn this on yourself. This is generally set to healer alerts only, so if you're not playing a healing class, this won't automatically select for you. But if you want to reflect it, you can put it here, and then it'll start showing up in your boss mods, and you'll have a timer for it to make it way easier to reflect. Okay, now what have I missed? What dungeon have I not talked about? We talked about Miss... Stone Vault, Dawnbreaker. Okay, so all we really haven't talked about is Siege and Necrotic Wake. Siege is very weird. So there's 2 things that we can do that could be useful. So the last boss, the Putrid Water Cast, can be reflected. Putrid Waters can be reflected, but it's really weird. I don't know exactly how it works, but you have to kind of guess, because you have to reflect before Putrid Waters is cast. You have to have reflect up for the entire duration of the travel time from Putrid Waters from the boss to you, and Spell Reflect has to be up when it hits you, when you've already pre-casted it before the boss itself casted Putrid Waters. And it's so RNG and it's so hit or miss. Most of the time, I kind of don't do it. It is possible to do, but I kind of just don't mess with it because it doesn't really do that much. However, you can, by casting Reflect, as you can see the water debuff literally traveling at your character. So if you press reflect when it's almost to your character, you can DR the application and most of the dot. Hopefully you're dispelled by them. But I would probably use it for the damage reduction more than anything else, because that thing hits like a truck. Like I said, it is technically reflectable, but it is so inconsistent, you're going to end up losing 25% damage reduction on basically one of the hardest hitting mechanics in that fight, which is why I recommend doing it there. You can also spell reflect the break waters. It just does a lot of damage, and you can reduce the damage with spell reflect because it's considered magic. That's kind of it. The only other thing that is kind of weird on this boss, or on this dungeon, is the second boss, the captain. The captain requires a slow at all times to be put onto the boss. Otherwise, she'll like leap around and do a bunch of random shit. Generally, this will never happen because there's probably always some kind of slow in your group. However, because we're running Mountain Thane and generally running, not necessarily running Crackling Thunder, but T-Clap itself does reduce movement speed, and this movement speed reduction is actually enough to keep this boss from running around. So if for some reason you don't have any kind of slow in your group, which generally won't happen, you will just passively, if you're playing Mountain Thane, keep this boss from running around. It's very, very niche, not really useful, but I'm kind of grasping for straws when I'm looking at this dungeon and when I'm looking at Necrotic Wake. Mainly because there's nothing really specific or special we can do. You can reflect the necrotic bolts off this boss, but the problem is the boss doesn't target players; it just targets the tank. So reflecting is really, really RNG, and it's not consistent, so it kind of sucks. The only thing we can actually consistently reflect in this entire dungeon is the Frozen Binds off the last boss. If you are targeted by Frozen Binds, you can just hit Spell Reflect. It won't apply to you. And that's kind of it. Some of these older dungeons don't really have a lot of like cool warrior stuff you can do. Most of that stuff I've showed you in the previous places, like Grim Batol or City of Threads, has the Shadows of Doubt, which reflecting that is really big for your party. Unfortunately, I do not have footage of it, so I can't show it. But yeah, otherwise that's it. That is at least one warrior tip for each dungeon. The next thing I'm probably looking to do is I'm going to do a short video on how to play the new the Mountain Thane, this build, going into Mythic Plus, just because I've seen a lot of questions about it. So I was like, I'll make a little thing. But I have some stuff after that. Hopefully you'll enjoy. I've honestly got some clickbait coming. It's big clickbait. When you see the thumbnail, it is so hilariously much of a lie in clickbait that you're not gonna don't believe it. I'm just doing it because I think it'd be really funny. But otherwise, yeah, I will see you when I see you. Those are my tips for the dungeons. If you have any other tips that maybe I don't know of, because the best part about having a community and talking to people is learning stuff from other people and gaining that knowledge yourself. If you have any cool tips, drop them below. Let me know. Let me know and let the people know your cool Mythic Plus tips that apply to Warrior or just in general. There are a lot of things I did not talk about. Like, for example, you can taunt reflect the Shadow Claw that does a big amount of damage to your tank. You can taunt reflect in Mist of the Maze, the big boys. You can taunt reflect the Guardian Anima Slashes, but those require a lot more teamwork and coordination and getting things taunted off of you. Because if you do that in a normal key, you're probably going to taunt, the mob's going to turn to you, melee you in one shot to death, and then go back to Anima Slashing your tank. So that's why I didn't really mention those kinds of things, because this is more of a general, more useful thing, or more useful tips than I would say than trying to be like, okay, you can spell off like this thing and this thing and that thing and this. It's like, once you start getting too advanced, they become less and less useful for people. Anyway, no more dragging out. That's it. Bye-bye.